So we're in the final stages of wrapping up our TIE fighter. Let us pop out of this view and go into our perspective view. You can see where we're at right here. Any other details you want to adjust, obviously feel free to do so. If you thought that this was too wide at this point, or if you wanted to make it smaller, you could always once again go through, and if you were to go into edge mode, you could always select all of these edges right there. If you wanted to make it smaller, again, I would recommend that you did it with the center scale tool, and obviously this makes it smaller this way, and then you're going to have to make it bigger this way to kind of adjust the width of it. This will allow you to keep it still universally the same size, and not have any extra length pulling over from the sides like we just saw. Another thing you could do is if you wanted to keep it nice and large on this end but wanted to make this end a little bit smaller. Everything is all connected at this point, remember, so we could always right click and go into edge mode, and instead of selecting all those other edges, we could double click on this one side edge right there. And if you watch this from down here, it's over here. If we use the scale tool on it, and again, make sure you're using the center light blue one, which will proportionally change the size of that. You could make it smaller going in that direction like that, so then it gets bigger and smaller. It's kind of really all dependent on your creative ideas for what your TIE fighter is going to look like. So the final stages, once again, are to go into face mode. Well, actually, let's go into object mode really quick here. And I'm going to take what I have right here and make sure that I am going to, well, okay, so a couple things. One is I want to make sure that the model is perfectly centered along this vertical dark black line as you see in the side view. This is going to be the center point of it. In addition, I want to move my pivot point to this point right there. We can do it now, we can do it later. The idea here is that if you've got the move tool turned on, if you press on the D key and hold the D key, you'll be able to adjust this pivot point over. Oftentimes it might take us backwards or forwards. So while you're holding the D key, I would also encourage you to hold down on the V key. And in doing so, this will adjust it to a particular vertice. And now the pivot point is going to be centered and definitely in alignment with the center point right here. Okay, so let's get out of the move tool. So that's the Q key. Right click and go into face mode. I'm going to start way out here and drag inward, and I'm going to select all these faces and delete those. So now I'm back to a solid model that looks something like this. So there's my hole, it's going all the way through. You can see on the other end is all those new edges and lines that we created. And again, whatever detailing you want to do for the side. I know some TIE fighters, or most TIE fighters I should say, are more six-sided than they are perfectly round like ours is. So take the time to adjust or play around with some of those vertices. Let's see if I were to go into vertex mode. A couple cool things you can do when you go into vertex mode is, let's say you wanted to flatten out some of these top ones right here. So when I do this, remember that it's going to select a couple extra ones than what we wanted. Let's see, I did want that one. But I want to make sure that nothing is selected over here, so always tumbling and toggling. If you go into your scale tool, this will flatten these out and start to create like a flatter top if that's something you want to do. Obviously you can adjust these individually, but again, you can play around with different shapes of what the TIE fighter is going to look like. All right, so now that I'm not going to play around with it anymore. You can kind of take the time to do so. Down here in the side orthographic view, you can see that my object exists on the negative Z side, so it exists over here, and I want it to exist on the opposite side, which happens to be the positive Z side. So keep that in mind when we go to the mesh menu and we click on the options box next to mirror. Here's what our mirror options look like. We want to, again, we've already deleted half of the object, so make sure you turn off cut geometry. We're going to do this based on the world axis. That's that black line in the middle right there. And we are going to toggle this across the Z side onto the opposite side and press the apply button. And here we go. There's where we're TIE fighter, you can see that before I click off this actually, the polymer window shows up right here. It shows us that we did merge it along the borders. So all of the vertices that were in the edges that were along this way that were opened at one point are now closed up and automatically merged for us. Okay, so I'll go back into object mode. The final stage for me is always to make sure that it truly is going to be merged together, so you can toggle between what's called the 1 and 3. So this is low res mode and 3 is high res mode. If you had any kind of gaping holes going through the center of here, you would see it. The lines would get kind of curvy, so that's kind of usually a good telltale sign that there's something going on right there. So hopefully that's helpful to you. Furthermore, I would encourage you to play around with the front side of what your TIE fighter is going to look like. I've got some different pictures that you can look at. Just playing around and adjusting the placement of your vertices allows you to change the shape of, let's say, a couple of these. Let's see if we grab. I'll try to be symmetrical and quick at the same time. So if I use the scale tool, I can scale these down, and you can see I'm trying to create myself like a round spherical shape right there. If I go back and select maybe the top and the bottom and the two inner sides, I'll use the scale tool again and shape it out this way. So now this might look like a window of some sort. So then we'll go into face mode. Let's go into face mode. And if we were to click, shift, click, all these different faces, you'll notice that I lost that scale tool by pressing the Q key. So now that I've got those faces selected right there, you can see where we're at. If I wanted to kind of make this into a window of sorts, I could go with my extrude tool. The extrude tool becomes available, and the way this works is that you always want to try to use the tools that come with the manipulator that comes with the extrude. I want to scale this to kind of create myself a little rim for the window. So don't click and drag, but simply click and release on one of the boxes that represents the scale tool. By clicking and releasing on it, you'll see that the center scale becomes available. So now I can click and drag on this, and this is going to create me a nice little edge around, and it conforms to the shape of the sphere, so it gives me a little edge that's coming around, and then I can re-extrude again. So I'm going to click on that extrude button one more time, and this time instead of scaling it, I'm going to move it and punch it in a little bit. So you can kind of see this is creating a nice little window for the side of the TIE fighter. There's a lot of different things that you can do to kind of change up the look and feel of it. To kind of give it some details. So I highly encourage you to go through and play around with the extrude tool and look at some different items that are out there on the web for different images to kind of give you ideas. The goal of this is to, again, play more with the various tools. The append polygon, that's what we use over here on the side. The extrude tool, polygons in general, and then utilizing faces and edges and vertices to kind of change the shape of an object and give it more detail work. So hopefully this video was helpful to you.